Hi everyone, thanks for coming out, especially with the heat. We thought we'd just acclimatise Danny whilst the testing. Welcome, Danny. Professor Danny O'Brien is a professor of sport management at Bond Business School at Bond University. He holds degrees from the Australian Catholic University and California State University, and then earned his PhD a bit close to home in England at De Montfort, just down the road. And then went back out to Brisbane. So he's been all over the world. Danny O'Brien's research covers event leveraging, institutional change, and sustainable surf tourism. And today he's going to be sharing some of his insights into his research into Papua New Guinea, examining how the Surfing Association Pink Nose Revolution uses sport to combat gender-based violence. So thank you, Danny, for coming all the way over, and looking forward to your presentation.
Thanks so much, Matt. And just before I continue, just a thank you to the Institute of Advanced Studies as well, and to Matt and all the team for hosting me and making me feel so welcome. So thank you everyone. And Verity gave me an amazing tour of the whole campus the other day when I thought I'd seen everything here, but no, oh my God, it's so big. And I've just noticed that I'm 1 year behind, and I put 2025 instead of 2026. When you think you've checked everything, you haven't. But thank you everyone for being here as well. And I don't normally present in shorts and a t-shirt, but given the temperature at the moment, I hope you can see the reasons for that. Just a little bit about where I'm from. This is my university, Bond University. It's a comparatively small university to here. We're a smaller niche university, 5,000 students max, and that's strategic. It's a choice that the university has made to stay small. Yeah, it's a great place to live and work. And just a little bit about me. And how I've gotten to this point. So I've kind of, after a failed professional rugby league career, I had to think, what will I do now? But I kind of Forrest Gumped my way into a doctoral program and academe. And there's a long story behind that, which I can share at another time. But I was lucky enough to land with a great supervisor at De Montfort University for my doctorate, who guided me into academe. So I'm a sport management scholar, and as Matt said, I've got sort of three main research streams, but all of them kind of coalesce under this umbrella of sport for development. And over the years, these photos just are a little bit of a collage of where my research has taken me. So for World Rugby years ago, that's a photo with the Netherlands, I think that was, women's sevens rugby team in Hong Kong when we were doing some work for World Rugby, a study for World Rugby. And the gentleman in the photo there at the far your left, is Ben Corbett. He was a PhD student who actually worked here at Loughborough for a short time. Down the bottom, I don't know if you're aware of artificial wave generation, but there's a whole movement going throughout the world of commercial surf parks where people pay to play for an hour, can catch up to around 12 to 18 waves in an hour, similar to what you do on an ice skating rink. That's happening for surfing. That gentleman there is Fernando Odriozola from the company Wave Garden, and he is one of the inventors of that technology. So pretty incredible. Top left, that's in Papua New Guinea, and I'm guessing I'm probably the only IAS scholar this week who's shown topless pictures of themselves. Yeah, that's probably appropriate for this temperature at the moment. But down the bottom is not just a shameless surf photo, but that's actually data collection, because a lot of the impromptu discussions, a lot of the unguarded moments, the things that you particularly remember and you go away and you scribble down, happen in those impromptu moments. So a lot of the discussions that I've had and meaningful moments have happened in discussions with people in the water, particularly in Papua New Guinea. So I guess it's one of the better sides of doing research in an area that you're passionate about. So over the years, I've published a little bit, 50 conference presentations, and you'd think you wouldn't be nervous anymore, but I'm still nervous. Some PhD supervisions, and most of my research comes from a qualitative perspective, and as does this research that I'm sharing with you today. So I'm going to sort of whip through much of the stuff here at the front fairly quickly so I can get to the back end of the presentation before time gets too far gone. So the research question, and this is a work in progress still, it's been a labour of love over the last sort of 3 years. I'm at the point now where I'm trying to write a conclusions section for publication. So yeah, so if I sound like I'm sort of looking for inspiration, I probably am a little bit because I've been grappling with this for so long. But the title of the study has changed a few times. But the research question basically is around, so under heavy resource constraint, how can a national sport organisation use a bricolage approach to help host communities address crippling social issues? And you'll notice that the term gender-based violence is not in there. That is one of the crippling social issues. But I'll get on to that in a moment. I'll talk about social entrepreneurship and that term bricolage in a moment. And as I said, qualitative approach. The data comes from 16 semi-structured interviews with, 16 interviews with 18 respondents, field notes, incidental discussions made in country. I've been doing research in Papua New Guinea on and off for about 12 years now. I was in country for this particular study for just over a week in early 2024. And since that time, and before that time, collected a lot of media articles as well, and other documents that I will get onto. Before we start, so a lot of this is founded upon surf tourism and the global surf tourism industry. So you might wonder, what is surf tourism? The image at the left, at your right, is from the Gold Coast, and it's in particular Snapper Rocks. It's one of the world's most iconic breaks. It's where I live. But what do you notice about it when you look at that? Very busy. Perfect waves, but incredibly busy. So it just takes all the fun out of it. The image on the left is from a boat trip that I did that was 2024 as well, in Indonesia. You're going around in 11 nights on that boat. We only surfed with other people one day. Mm-hmm. The rest of the time, it's just totally, a self-indulgent, fantastic experience of great surf with no one else around. What is happening is surfing is growing globally. It's now an Olympic sport. The technology is loaning itself to more people taking it up, different demographic groups. And it's growing at about 20% per annum. So that's significant. So what we've got is this emergence of a largely Western participant base that's cash rich but time poor. So they're willing and able to go to remote corners of developing countries to get waves to themselves, to have this surfing experience without the masses. So in defining surf tourism, surfing becomes tourism as soon as surfers travel away from their local surf break with riding waves as a primary purpose for travel. And I would add to that, that includes overnight stays. And a surf tourist is a surfer first and a tourist second. So this doesn't include, folks who, while they're in Waikiki, they do a surfing lesson for a day. That's not surf tourism. That's just an incidental part of other tourism. Show me the numbers. So there's some figures in the US, in Australia, in the UK. You can see we're talking in the billions in terms of currency. It comes in numerous forms. So the top image is myself and my daughter. That's domestic surf tourism. We often go down to our favorite place in the world, Crescent Head, and there's Molly, my daughter. She loves soft, easy waves on a longboard, and it's great fun. Great family experience. The bottom picture, things are a bit more critical, and that's a photo from the Tilo Islands in Indonesia. Surf tourism usually happens in groups. Sometimes it's individual, but it's domestic. It's international, and it's global. It is global, and it's growing. So that's sort of the backdrop to what we're talking about. Now moving to Papua New Guinea. So Papua New Guinea is incredibly rich in mineral deposits. US $15.4 billion in revenue in 2022 in terms of exports. However, because there's been decades of corruption, the money doesn't get to the communities. So there's very little transport infrastructure, communication infrastructure, health, education. It just doesn't filter down to the grassroots. Having said that, when you go there, it is a natural paradise. Imagine, any environment before any construction or any intervention from humans. Much of Papua New Guinea looks like that. So unspoiled rainforests, coastlines, 10 to 17 million people. They're not sure how many people live there. Even the Prime Minister has said that. Collectively speaking, more than 900 dialects. So it's an incredibly diverse country. And geographically, you can see where it is. If you know where Australia is, they're our closest neighbour. Up there, Papua New Guinea, and that's where Bond University is. So the Surfing Association of Papua New Guinea is at the core of this study. So it was established by a guy named Andy Abel back in 1989. And what he did was he built on some Melanesian traditions of wave riding. And what they used to ride on were things called palangs, or splinters in English. And what a splinter is what you see up here. They were just offcuts of disused canoes. And mainly kids would ride waves for recreation. So surfing wasn't totally new to Papua New Guineans when Andy came along in 1989 and introduced modern surfing with modern surfboards. What he also did in 1989, Andy's a little bit different to your average Papua New Guinean in that he comes from a fairly privileged background. His father was Sir Cecil Abel, and he was one of the authors of the Papua New Guinean Constitution. So Andy had the opportunity to travel and to see what was going on in the rest of the world, where surf tourism, the model of it is that typically a Western, Australian or American or European goes into a remote corner of a developing country, sees beautiful waves and thinks, awesome, I'm going to build a surf camp here. I'm going to get lots of people in from my country and other countries. I'll lock the locals out. They can come in and work for a pittance, but otherwise, we don't want to teach them to surf because they'll make the water crowded. So that was the general model. Andy said that's not going to happen in Papua New Guinea. We're going to have this thing called the Surf Management Plan, where he goes into communities and recognises their ownership of surfing resources. So land ownership in Papua New Guinea, 97% of the country is owned by clans. So it's familial clans own 97% of the land in the country. So And land ownership doesn't end at the high tide mark as it does in most countries. It extends out a couple of kilometres into the ocean. So that means that all of those fringing reefs that people fish on and that we surf on are actually owned by these local communities. So Andy built all of that into these surf management plans where he divided the country up, its surf zones up into 6 zones, went into these communities and said, hey, do you know that you've got a resource straight out there and people will pay to come and do this thing called surfing? And he explains surfing to them, leaves it to them to decide, do we want surfing or do we not? If they say yes, they then decide, well, how many people can you accommodate per day? And of the 6 surf camps, there's 11 board riders clubs. Of the 6 surf camps throughout the country, they've each landed between 10 and 20 surfers per day is all they want. So these are small operations. So that's a complete departure from surf tourism approaches in other countries. Limits the daily number of foreign surf tourists, and each of them pay a levy that equates to about $20 Australian dollars per day that they're in the country. And that money is collected and given to the local communities twice yearly. And that money is used on pre-planned initiatives around community development. So aid posts, water reticulation projects, houses of worship, whatever educational facilities, whatever they strategically decide we want to do with this money to build our community, that's their money to do that. So that's giving back to the community something tangible. I'll come back to that. So the sport of surfing, if you agree to set up a commercial surf tourism operation, mandatory is setting up a board riders club to teach the local kids how to surf and to get them into the sport. So there's now 11 board riders clubs throughout the country that have been established in that way. They get about 2,000 surf tourists a year. So again, we're not talking mega numbers here because the infrastructure can't handle it. You know, the transport infrastructure, all of the infrastructure is maxed out. And the images that you see here, I've spoken about the splinters. This is at Tapira Surf Club, and the guy standing here with the green shorts on, that's him surfing down here on another day, but incredibly naturally gifted athlete. And this is an example of what goes on, just impromptu one afternoon. He goes by Elvis. I don't know what his real name is, but he goes by Elvis. Elvis was there teaching these kids were asking him about his bottom turn, which is a fundamental move in surfing, and so he's gained all this social capital through this sport that he just happens to be naturally. He's probably good at all sports, I don't know, but surfing has become a real social centre for them, and they're absolutely fanatical about it. However, there is no surf industry in Papua New Guinea. So all of the surfboards, all of the equipment is donated by visiting surfers and through an international network of surf tourism agencies that I'll get onto in a moment. But this is critical, and that's why I've highlighted it, because that is an opportunity to create change. In among all this, in Papua New Guinea, there is an endemic gender-based violence problem. Gender-based violence obviously is not, Papua New Guinea is not the only place in the world that has gender-based violence problems. We have it all over the world. Australia has a huge problem. But in Papua New Guinea, it is extreme, to the point where Human Rights Watch said that it's one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a woman or girl. More than 2/3 of women are victims of GBV. I couldn't help in doing interviews over there thinking, when I was interviewing males, it just crossed the back of my mind. So if 2/3 of the women are victims, does that mean that 2/3 of the men are perpetrators? I don't know. what the answer is to that, but you know, it was a constant sort of thing floating around in the back of my mind. Some interviewees actually told me that they had been arrested. But so strategically thinking through this problem, how can we solve problems of this scope through sport? So that's where this concept of bricolage came in. I had interviewed Andy in Brisbane mid 2023, and we were talking about all of this. And I, you know, with my background with Andy and knowing about this, the plans, I knew a little bit about it, but I'd recently also come across this bricolage concept. So it's about repurposing and flexibly engaging existing resources to accomplish goals. So reconfiguring the resources on hand to achieve what you need to achieve. I thought, wow, that really fits here. And where it comes from is social entrepreneurship, where social entrepreneurship is about operating a mission-driven business to solve systematic, societal, or environmental challenges. So it's not only financial, but it's also being in business to address social issues. And bricolage fits in because it's about combining whatever resources we've got to solve a problem. So imagine going camping, you need to hammer in your pegs, you haven't got a hammer. What do you do? What do you do?
Use a shoe.
Use a shoe, find a big rock, use a spanner, whatever it takes to get the nail driven in. So you know that's a crude example of bricolage. So here we're going to look at, well, how does they go about using bricolage to address these crippling societal problems through sport. Bricolage breaks down into material bricolage, where you've got internal resources. So internally, you know, they've got incredible coastline, the coastal ecosystem that lends itself to surfing is a resource. As they built the surf camps, they have physical infrastructure. You know, learning, well, what do Japanese surf tourists like to eat, and is that different to Australians? Is that different to Americans, etc. So these are all skills and capabilities that they've developed through this exposure to surf tourism. Externally, external resources. Primarily, we're talking about relational and social networks. So how do surfers find out about Papua New Guinea and make the arrangements to get there? Well, they do it through what we call surf travel agencies. We're all familiar with a travel agency. Well, there's surf travel agencies that just specialize. Two of the bigger ones are the Perfect Wave and World Safaris. So they connect Western surfers up to get there. This is the logo for KBN Surf Club, one of the local board riders clubs. So what they then do is get the Western surfers there, who then pay the levy that goes into the communities. Okay, so it's a nice leveraging of networks to get surfers in there. Meanwhile, as well as material bricolage, there's ideational bricolage. So this is about leveraging the beliefs, the value systems, myths, norms. It's also about looking at reputation and legitimacy and looking at them as intangible resources. So, you know, Papua New Guinea culture, I've already spoken about splinters and the history of surfing in Papua New Guinea that all of this has built upon. So thinking it through, what resources does the SAPNG, Surfing Association of Papua New Guinea, actually have access to? Well, they've got these networks. So this is an Instagram post from Surfing PNG, and you can see World Safaris and Surfing Association of Papua New Guinea surfboard donations. So this surf travel agency has organised this surfboard drive in Australia to get surfboards to Papua New Guinea. So they're getting surfers and surfboards into Papua New Guinea. So revenue and actual surfing equipment that goes to this national network of board riders clubs. So material bricolage in action. We also know that the traditional values, beliefs, norms, and practices that a surf management plan is built on the traditional reef fee system in Melanesian culture, and this doesn't just happen in Papua New Guinea. If you want to go and fish on the reef of, if I wanted to go to Dan's clan's area and fish on his reefs, I would have to pay his clan a reef fee, and that might be a share of the catch or something like that. So Andy built this model, this surf management plan, and the surfers paying a levy, built it on this reef fee system. It's called koli koli in their language, but it had a cultural anchor, so people understood it. As I said, Melanesians and their history of splinter riding. Shared community values around democracy, inclusion, social justice, and education. Papua New Guinea also has a really complex role of women in society. Most of the coastal areas are matrilineal, where the women actually own the land. The inland areas are patrilineal, where the men own the land. You would think that in the matrilineal areas, women would be better treated, but from my interviews and my own observations, it didn't seem to be the way. But there is that history there. All of that boils down to opportunities for ideational bricolage. So we mentioned legitimacy as a resource as well. So SAPNG, over its 37-year history, has built some legitimacy through getting these runs on the boards through the local communities, recognition of the local communities, ownership of those nature-based resources, upgrading of educational resources. So, for example, this is the St. Therese School in Lido Village near the village of near the township of Vanamo, and this is a classroom. So you can see no windows, open air. The school hasn't been added to since 1947. So the Surfing Association come along and build a classroom that actually has windows and solar panels, so it can be air conditioned, and they source 16 computers. So the first development of this school since 1947 was done through surfing. As I mentioned, also the quality of life projects. There's also, they built policy frameworks because the SAPNG own all of the surfboards in the country. They created policies to get kids to go to school. So if a kid shows up with red teeth, that means they've been chewing betel nut. I don't know if you've ever heard of betel nut, but it has a slightly hallucinogenic effect. And the World Cancer Council identified Papua New Guinea as the country in the world that leads the world in mouth cancer. And it's largely from, you see old timers with the gum, like you're just looking straight at their jawbone and teeth because their gums have been eaten away from chewing betel nut. But you see little kids with red teeth, so they've obviously been chewing betel nut. It hangs around. You see teachers with red teeth, and you just really. But if there's any evidence of betel nut, no access to surfboards. If there's any gang membership, sorry, no surfboards. If they don't go to school, so no school, no surf policy. So there's all these interventions into the community that is possible and that they have been implementing now for 37 years. And enter gender-based violence. So what about that? If you look at this image, this is Andy Abel, and this is a surfer named Ruthie at Tupira Surf Club. And what he's doing is painting the noses of these surfboards pink, because the Surfing Association owns all of the surfboards. But what Andy found was that boys and men were dominating the surfboards, and women and girls were not even getting a look in. In Papua New Guinea, female access to sporting opportunities is limited. So surfing was evolving no differently. So Andy actually, in their constitution, they actually cite their national constitution, which, as I told you, his father was one of the authors of. So I was very close to his heart. But within the SAPNG constitution, they put in a clause around equal access for genders to surfing. So he has leaned on that and said, okay, what we're going to do is intervene here. You're not playing nice. I'm confiscating 50% of the surfboards in the country and I'm painting their nose pink. And what that signifies is surfboards only for women and girls. And on there, we're going to have this sticker, Surfers Against Violence Against Women, empowering women with equal rights and opportunities. And on top of that, each club is going to have a woman on the board. So that, and if they don't do that, no surfboards. So it's this wielding of power, and that's why I highlighted the surfboards earlier on. So that's what the Pink Nose Revolution is about. The aim was to start community level conversations about gender equity and gender-based violence. And they use this mantra, educating the young and reforming the old. And I've got some great quotes around that. But 8 years in, it's not 50-50 yet. There are still problems. There are still, you know, the examples of, you know, why would you want to go out surfing when there's meals to be cooked, when there's you know, kids to be run after and so on. The men literally, you see them walking back from shopping and the men are just sort of walking along and the women are carrying all the bags and everything. They're literally indentured slaves in and I'm not exaggerating there, in the day-to-day life. So for them to turn around and say, hey, I'm actually going to go and enjoy myself for an hour or two, is a big thing, a big issue. And then if they're seen talking to men out there, there's all kinds of jealousy. And so there have been beatings caused because of that. So it's, you know, even though there is some positive movement, it's not all plain sailing. Just this theme of it being a conversation starter. This was respondent 12. There's a she's actually also a school teacher, but she was relaying when Andy and another female board member named Sylvia go into the communities to tell them about the Pink Nose Revolution and what it's all about. This is referring to those talks. So she said, after Andy's talks, my friend said to me, what's he talking about? What's this GBV? Like, imagine a Papua New Guinean accent. What's this GBV? What's he talking about? I've never heard this word GBV before. What does it mean? Why do we need to be aware? And I explained that it's not one word, it's 3 letters, gender-based violence. That's stand for gender-based violence. And what? What's gender? You know, they weren't familiar with the term. So Andy's up there and Sylvia, his colleague, are up there talking about gender-based violence. And if they don't even know what the word gender means, you've got a problem. So that's kind of a bit of a miss there. So they hadn't heard that word. They still didn't understand. So I told them it's about trying to stop the man beating the woman. That's not right. That has got to stop. Imagine all that with a Papua New Guinean accent, which I'm not going to try and do. This is from a female SAPNG board member, and this was more about the symbolic effect of a woman actually being in a position of authority. And she said the difference we make, it's not just on the wage, you know, with me and Andy traveling together, having a male and female and saying that we're both running this equally, and the way that we interact in front of people, you know, like there's never a moment that Andy doesn't defer to me. Like he goes, and named redacted, but I've already said Sylvia. What do you think? And it gives me the space to speak. And those moments make people go, oh, wait, no, a woman has an opinion too. Oh, she sees something different. And it just becomes this exemplar of them sort of walking the talk. And she said, we actually didn't think about that, but it's just allowing that space for that to sink in that, you know, yeah, well, I guess that's why they're wanting us to have women on the board. So all of this has been attracting attention. The World Surf League is the global governing body for professional surfing, and they chose to run a world championship event in Papua New Guinea in 2017. And it was just as Andy was launching this pink nose revolution. So it was an opportunity to highlight this to the world, and it was the first time that professional surfers had sort of looked at this and realized that they could get involved. I'm just going to skip, show the. So this is put together by award-winning journalist named Matt Dietrich. This is just the trailer for this documentary that he's making about this. So it's attracting attention from global governing bodies, media stakeholders, and taking it to the world. So you can imagine the impact of the legitimacy in the local community to have these global stakeholders. But most of these people haven't travelled out of their villages.
All right, try this pink paint, fluoro pink paint in honour of the pink nose revolution. You know, domestic violence against women is a global issue. It's one of the fundamental issues that's undermining the fabric of all societies, regardless of race, creed, or colour. But more importantly, here in Papua New Guinea, we're seeing this issue undermining not only the immediate family, but undermining whole communities.
The Pink Nose Revolution is really inspiring. I mean, as a woman and as
knows, you know, Papua New Guineans, we have the underestimation between men and women. So that's why I support and able for that. So when the first donations coming in, which was I think 2012, and that was from the One Talks from Australia. They have donated us some boards, and the boards was distributed in the 4 communities, and we shared in between.
I'm very happy to see that this board has got a bit of pink in it.
Yep.
So we won't have to do too much work to pinken up the nose. We'll pink up this one.
Yes.
Thanks, Rachel and Caitlin. Really appreciate the donation.
Thank you for doing what you're doing and promoting women who go surfing and having rights. Never plays up.
They came in to watch the game and do all this. It's a big pride to us, and we can't believe that, but it's happened.
At the back in red, we have Nathan. Wow, these kids.
I'll stop there because we're going to run out of time. But on this theme of attracting attention beyond surfing, in 2023, through the US Embassy in Port Moresby, the capital of Papua New Guinea, the US State Department took an interest. So this is part of their sport diplomacy division, which I'm guessing probably doesn't exist now under the present administration. But what they did was send what they called surfing envoys, so 3 professional surfers to Papua New Guinea who toured the country running surf clinics and having discussions with local communities about the issues affecting them, and obviously mainly about gender-based violence. So again, another international high-profile actor taking an interest in what's happening in Papua New Guinea. And Alison Teal, one of the surfers, Time magazine called her I forget that. I can't remember what the term was, but adventure-based. Harrison Ford in that movie.
Indiana Jones?
the female Indiana Jones. Time magazine referred to Alison Teal as the female Indiana Jones. With what she does, she's got a gazillion TikTok followers and Instagram and so on. But she was one of the surfers, and she said it was an honor to be chosen by the US State Department to visit PNG and make waves of change in gender-based violence, since almost every female lives in fear for their lives. And she talks about just the impact it had on her. So again, this is major attention being attracted by what they're doing in making an actual difference. And then finally, in 2024, Andy himself was recognised by a sitting monarch, and I don't think there's ever been any other surfer who's gotten an OBE for services to the surfing industries. But again, what all of this has done is shine a light on what they're doing and put the gender-based violence and gender equity issue front and centre, to the point now where the current plan is to upscale this to Sport Revolution PNG and to take it to the other 40 odd national governing bodies in Papua New Guinea with similar messaging around gender equity and gender-based violence. So what you're seeing there is the Port Moresby, some of the rugby teams in Port Moresby. They still haven't got the new logo, but there is a new logo around that. So that's Andy's current plan to upscale this, not to beyond surfing, to sport national governing bodies in Papua New Guinea, and he also has plans to take it internationally. But this brings us to the end, and making some conclusions around this. So, maybe there's new ways for stakeholders to think about social entrepreneurship in taking this bricolage approach and looking at sport-related resources in building community and making a difference. This is an example of the routine use of bricolage. Like they're not sitting there thinking, I'm going to use material bricolage. It's just what they're doing. I've put the label on it because I've come from the boring academic side of things to analyze it. But what they've done is like this delicate balance between material and ideational bricolage, and synthesized creative and strategic thinking with that clear mission that it's not just about surfing, it's about building the community and building the nation. And that's built into their constitution. So it's about, for them, reframing these traditional norms, values, and practices as ideational resources. And any of the material bricolage seemed to have this antecedent in ideational. So the idea, it was all built upon values, beliefs, and anchored in those deep community histories. And more generally, and this comes from one of the quotes in there, that GBV directly or indirectly affects every family in PNG, but then so does sport. They're sport fanatics. So why not use sport as a Trojan horse to get people talking about these issues? And that's the whole educating the young to reform the old logic. And at the end of the day, if it works in PNG, it can maybe work everywhere. It's not unique. Thank you, everyone.